Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In case you're new here, my name is Laura and I'm a PhD student of comparative literature in Germany. And today I'm starting a new series on this channel, which I'm very excited for. It's about fantasy and science fiction literature. And I thought what I would like to read, and actually I'm always more interested in the classics, like the old text, the old stories that inspired modern writers to write the stories that we call now fantasy and science fiction, for example. So that's why I picked out 24 different stories or poems or whatever, and they are actually dating back to around 2100 BCE and go onwards to the end of the 19th century. So actually I'm not planning to look at anything more modern than that. So everything that you would normally call science fiction literature, fantasy literature, like the high fantasy genre, everything you know, like going on with Tolkien and Harry Potter and everything, that's absolutely amazing and interesting, but that's not what I'm interested in this series. So maybe I will read that later on, but for now I'm interested in the origins of fantasy and science fiction literature, if you could say so, because I think it's very difficult to set a date or set like a time when science fiction and fantasy literature emerged, because there's been fantastical stories and also stories that deal with like scientific inventions and also like going out into outer space from actually from ancient times onwards. And I think it's so interesting to see like all the imagination that the authors at these ancient times already possessed. So how they worked out these stories, and I really want to look at these stories and just see which stories emerged and how they inspired each other. So if you are interested, then you can follow along. I will just quickly introduce the text that I picked out that I'm planning to read. Changes may occur because maybe I realize that I'm not so much into a text, or it's difficult to read, or not the right text for the right time, but I'm planning on reading through them chronologically, and that's why I'm also trying to give that introduction into the texts now. I will just quickly say something about the plot sometimes, and also just say why I'm interested in the text. So let me start. The first text, number 1 from ancient times, is from around 2150 to 2000 BCE. It's not really easy to set a date for that. It's the Epic of Gilgamesh, and probably you've heard about it. It's sometimes it's said to be one of the most famous ancient texts before the Odyssey and the Iliad by Homer. And it is an epic poem from Mesopotamia. It tells the story of Gilgamesh. He's the king of Uruk, and his adventures with his friend Enkidu, a wild man who was created by the gods to stop Gilgamesh from oppressing the people of Uruk. And I think it's interesting that the French science fiction writer Pierre Verzon argued that Gilgamesh was the first science fiction work due to its treatment of human reason and the quest for immortality. So I think that's really interesting to see that people are already thinking about that. Is that the Epic of Gilgamesh, is that science fiction or fantasy? Can that be called like that? Because the real genres really emerged only in the late 19th century, I think. But that's really something I'm interested in, I want to look at. So that will be one of the first videos coming up around next week, I think. So if you're interested, stay tuned. The second one would be the so-called Ramayana. It's a Hindu epic, and it includes flying machines able to travel into space or underwater and destroy entire cities using advanced weapons. And it is dated around 5th or 4th century BCE. So a little closer to our time, but still very much in the past. I think that sounded interesting as well, because Indian poetry, it's different, and it's also from a very different cultural background, I think, but that was what I wanted to look at as well. The third one would be the Metamorphoses by Ovid, probably you know about them. It comprises over 250 myths in 15 books. It's a huge work, there's so many stories in it. I already read some of them actually in school back when I was learning Latin, but I think there's a lot in it, and I just wanted to look at some of the stories that I found most interesting and like talk about them to you and which kinds of fantastical elements Ovid uses here. Then the fourth one would be 1001 Nights. It's very difficult to set a date for that because I think they also emerged around like probably around, I think maybe 250 onwards, like 250 of our time onwards, and it was like written down several times, translated from different languages, like I think sometime from Arabic to French and then also later to German and English, and so it's really difficult to say when these stories were actually like invented. But I think it's interesting that like all of us like know, for example, the story of Aladdin, but there's also many different stories, and I just wanted to read through the work and see what I think is interesting about that. Because there's also several stories that feature like science fiction elements. For example, the Adventures of Bulukiya, I think it's called, where the protagonist Bulukiya's quest for the herb of immortality leads him to explore the sea's journey to the Garden of Eden and to Jahannam, the Islamic hell. And he travels across the cosmos to different worlds much larger than his own world, anticipating elements of galactic science fiction. That's what I read on Wikipedia. I hope you also think that's interesting. So let me see how I like these stories, and I will talk about them soon. Number 5 would be from the 2nd century, Lukian of Samosata's True History. It is really interesting, I think. Lukian was a satirical writer. He wrote many satirical stories, and most of them are really worth a read, I think. I haven't read so many, but the ones I read I really enjoyed. He uses a voyage to outer space and conversation with alien life forms to comment on the use of exaggeration within travel literature and debates. And I also read somewhere that it can be seen as like a parody on Homer's Odyssey, I think. And it uses typical themes that you can also find in science fiction. And like, yeah, already just this travel to outer space, I think, is a very interesting element in these like ancient times. So I really want to look at that, especially if it like looks at the things from a like satirical perspective, also looking on our own world. Number 6 would be Beowulf. You probably know about that one too. It's an old English epic poem in the tradition of Germanic heroic legends, and it consists of 3,182 alliterative lines, and it's like also said that it's one of the most often translated works of Old English literature, and I think it's really influential for many writers later as well. It dates back to around 8th to 11th century, so we jumped very far here from the 2nd to the 8th to 11th. Probably there's also been interesting writings in the time between, but I haven't found any when I was trying to research that I could read easily and that I could also get my hands on. So if there's something that you think could be interesting to look at from like between the like 3rd century and the, what would it be, like the 7th or 8th, just let me know. Maybe there's like among you an expert on that time. That would be amazing. So the next one would be the Konjaku Monogatari. It dates to the 12th century. It's a collection of tales from times now and past. That's what the English title says. And it's considered the greatest work of Japanese setsu wa bungaku. It's like tale literature, a genre that flourished between the 9th and 18th century, and it also contains a lot of fantastical elements. So that's why I wanted to look at it, and also to change my perspective to Japan for a change. So just to look at other traditions as well, because when I try to look up something about like Asian and like especially Japanese or Chinese fantasy and science fiction, I think by now there's many works because they have been influenced a lot by the Western cultures, but I couldn't really find anything like what you would consider fantasy or science fiction in a more narrow sense before maybe like the 20th century. So maybe there's more, but when I did my research I couldn't find so much on that. Of course there's also stories with like fantastical elements, but I think this like Konjaku Monogatari, it sounded very intriguing, so that's why I'm looking at it. Then we have number 8. It's the Lais of Marie de France. The Lais is like a special kind of verse poetry. It's a work consisting of 12 narrative poems published in 1170, and they are focusing on glorifying the concept of courtly love by the adventures of their main characters, and they are thought to form the basis of what would eventually become the genre known as the Breton Lais. So like from the Breton tradition in Western France. And that's also something I just wanted to look at. So there's so many different influences, traditions, and also like oral poetry, I think oral stories and narratives that are handed down from generation to generation, and some of them are still available to us, and I just want to get to know as much as possible from different cultures and different times, so that's why I wanted to look at that. The next one is also widely known, I think. It's the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. The poem discusses the state of the soul after death and presents an image of divine justice, meted out as a due punishment or reward, and describes Dante's travels through hell, purgatory, and heaven. And allegorically, the poem represents the soul's journey towards God, beginning with the recognition and rejection of sin in the Inferno, then followed by the penitent Christian life, the Purgatorio, which is then followed by the soul's ascent to God in Paradiso. So I think that's one of the also most influential works of literature in the medieval times. It was published, I think, in 1320. So I have never gotten around to read it yet, but I'm planning to do so as a number 9 on my list here. Number 10 would be Le Morte d'Arthur by Thomas Malory. Which is like Anglo-Norman French for the death of Arthur, and it is about King Arthur, and the legendary King Arthur you probably know because he's been talked about in so many stories and also movies, and so it's about him, Guinevere, Lancelot, Merlin, and the Knights of the Round Table, and also along with their respective folklore. In order to tell a complete story of Arthur, Thomas Malory took this content and he rearranged and interpreted and modified material from various French and English traditions and sources, and today it is known as one of the best known works of Arthurian literature, so that's why I wanted to look at it. And I'm looking at a modernized version made and published by William Caxton from 1485. So I'm really interested in that because there's the Arthurian literature, there's so many different works, especially from the French and German and English traditions, and I would love to read all of them, but I've only got limited time next to my PhD, so that's why I plan on looking at this one. Tell me if you know about it. I'd be really interested if anyone on here has read that before. Number 11 would be the Utopia by Thomas More. because in the wake of scientific discoveries that characterized the Enlightenment, several new types of literature began to take shape in 16th century Europe already. And Thomas More was a humanist thinker whose work of fiction and political philosophy entitled Utopia, which I wanted to look at, describes a fictional island whose inhabitants have perfected every aspect of their society. And the name of this society stuck so well. It's called Utopia. And actually that's why you can say this novel has been rather influential, so that's why I wanted to look at it. The next one would be Gargantua and Pantagruel by François Rabelais. It's a pentalogy of novels, so it's 5 novels. It tells the adventures of 2 giants, Gargantua and his son Pantagruel, and it's written in an amusing, extravagant style, and features vulgarity, wordplay, and is regularly compared to works of Shakespeare and James Joyce. And I think that's interesting. I haven't read it yet, but I think, just look at it and see whether I like it. Number 14 would be The Tempest by William Shakespeare, which was written in 1610 to 11. It's one of the last plays, I think, that is considered to have been written by Shakespeare alone. After the first scene, which takes place on a ship at sea during a tempest, the rest of the story is set on a remote island where Prospero, a complex and contradictory character, lives with his daughter Miranda and his 2 servants, Caliban, a savage monster figure, and Ariel, an airy spirit. And the play contains music and songs that evoke the spirit of enchantment on the island. So it also explores many themes, including magic, betrayal, revenge, and family. And I thought, especially this magical element and also the gods and stuff, that's really something I wanted to look at. And also when you look up fantasy literature, before, you can say 1900 or something, The Tempest always comes up as one of the plays, and it's, I think, the only play that I've got here on my list. So, and it's also Shakespeare, so why not read it? I have seen it on stage, but I haven't read it as a play, so I'm excited. The next one would be from 1657, The Other World, The Comical History of the States and Empires of the Moon by Cyrano de Bergerac. In this work, the French dramatist Cyrano de Bergerac tells of his own fictional attempts to reach a lunar civilization that sees the Earth as its own moon, and the curious beings he finds when he finally reaches there. And I think that's a really interesting idea, turning things around, as I already said, going to a lunar civilization on the moon and then seeing Earth as your own moon. I think it's really nice, and it is also considered one of the earliest science fiction stories, if you could say so. And it's also the first story envisioning of a rocket-powered space flight. So I think that's lovely. In 1657, Cyrano de Bergerac already imagined this rocket flight, so that's really cool. The next one is number 16. It's The Blazing World by Margaret Cavendish, also called The Duchess of Newcastle. It's a fanciful depiction of a satirical utopian kingdom in another world, with different stars in the sky that can be reached via the North Pole. And according to the novelist Stephen H. Propp, it is the only known work of a utopian fiction by a woman in the 17th century, as well as an example of what we now call proto-science fiction. But it's also a romance, an adventure story, and even an autobiography. And it is also considered in general fantasy and science fiction. So a lot of things come together in that work, I think, and that's why I wanted to look at it. And especially because it's also very nice to see that women have been writing during that time already, and some of them even got published. Like Margaret Cavendish, I think she was also lucky that she was supported by her husband when publishing her work. she's been writing extensively, and her husband also wrote the prologue to her Blazing World novel. So yeah, let me just look at that and then tell you more about it later. Number 17 is the Contes de Fées by Marie-Catherine d'Aulnoy, I think she's called. It's like the fairy stories by her, and it lay the groundwork for French like artificial fairy tales. In German they would be called Kunstmärchen, which differ from other fairy tales as they were not handed down by the vernacular, but rather you could be attributed or ascribed to one single author. And they were not intended for children, but for adults in aristocratic society, especially these tales by Marie-Catherine d'Aulnoy. And I'm really interested in reading those, especially because I think it's very interesting to see, like, especially fairy tales written for this aristocratic society. So what kinds of stories does she tell, and why are they written the way they are written? Number 18 would be Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift from 1726, which also has the alternative title Travels into Several Remote Nations of the World in 4 parts. By Lemuel Gulliver, first a surgeon and then a captain of several ships. It is a prose satire by the Anglo-Irish writer and clergyman Jonathan Swift, who satirizes both human nature and the traveller's tales literary subgenre. And it's Swift's best known full-length work, and like really a classic of English literature, so that's also why I wanted to include it here. And Swift claimed that he wrote Gulliver's Travels to vex the world rather than divert it. So yeah, let me just look at that as well. I think like the very well-known books I don't have to talk like extensively about on this channel, but I still want to talk about some of them because some of them have been really influential and also are really worth a read, so that's why I want to include them. Number 19, I'm looking forward to that one as well, is by Voltaire, Micromegas. It's a novella, and it recounts the visit to Earth of a being from a planet circling the star Sirius and his companion from the planet Saturn. And he uses the technique of like an outsider to comment on aspects of Western culture, which was very popular during the period. It was published in 1752, and Voltaire himself used that element in several of his stories, and I think Voltaire's writing is a lot of fun actually. I read Candide and I also read some poetry of him yet, so I'm really excited in reading that one as well. Number 20, The Last Man by Mary Shelley. It's like a later work of her, like Frankenstein has been written by her at the age of 18 and 19, so she was really young, but The Last Man she wrote a little later. It was published in 1826, and it's an apocalyptic dystopian science fiction novel, and it is also sometimes considered as like one of the first science fiction novels. But I mean, as you can see from what I told you about the other stories, like many of them have actually been ascribed as like science fiction, fantasy or something the like, and it's really difficult to grasp when like really the genre would have emerged, I think. So the narrative of this story concerns Europe in the late 21st century, ravaged by the rise of a bubonic plague pandemic that rapidly sweeps across the entire globe, and ultimately resulting in the near extinction of humanity. And it also includes discussion of the British state as a republic, for which Shelley sat in meetings of the House of Commons actually, to gain insights to the governmental system of the Romantic era. And I think that's really interesting, like also to see how different writers use different elements to like either, for example, satirize or just comment on ongoing debates or struggles or just events in society and problems. And like, yeah, some of them satirize them. They they like evoke attention for certain problems. They also just describe it from like a different perspective, like an outsider coming to our world. And there's so many different approaches to like dealing with our own world and also other worlds. So there's like, yeah, it's wonderfully rich, everything. So that's why I'm loving reading the stories, I think. Number 21 is The Mummy, a Tale of the 22nd Century by Jane Webb, published in 1827. It concerns the Egyptian mummy of Cheops, who is brought back to life in the year 2126. So more than 100 years in our future. The novel describes a future filled with advanced technology and was the first English language novel story to feature a reanimated mummy. And I think it's a lovely idea to just like reawaken Cheops and see how he goes about in the year 2126 and what's going to change, and how does this very, very old person adapt to society and life at that time. I'm really looking forward to that one as well. It sounds like it could be really something for me, so stay tuned. Number 22 is from 1865, Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. I think I don't have to say too much about that because you probably know it. Either you know one of the movies or you know the original work. It's been one of my favorites forever, and I really want to reread it for this series. And I think I want to comment on the different parts of it. I think it has even 4 parts actually. Here, I've got it here with me. Let me just check. So there's like the first one, Alice Adventures in Wonderland, everyone knows that, I think. Then you've got Alice Through the Looking Glass, the second part that I think not so many people know, but it's actually my favorite, I think. And then you also have, like in this collection, I have The Hunting of the Snark, An Agony in 8 Fits, and there's another one, Alice's Adventures Underground. I haven't read those yet actually, but I'm looking forward to, so stay tuned. Number 23, The Phantastes, a fairy romance for men and women, a fantasy novel by Scottish writer George MacDonald, published in 1858. The story centers on the character Enodos, which is called like Pathless in Greek, and it takes its inspiration from German Romanticism, particularly from Novalis. And the story concerns a young man who is pulled into a dreamlike world, and there hunts for his ideal of female beauty embodied by the Marble Lady. And the book itself, so it was influenced by the Romantic tradition, which I've been talking extensively about in my series on Gothic and Romantic literature, which is, by the way, not finished yet. I will add more videos over time, but if you're interested in especially like the idea of the marble statue, which was also covered by Josef von Eichendorff, check out my video. I will link it in the description below. But the interesting thing is that George MacDonald himself, he was an influence and inspiration to authors such as C.S. Lewis and also J.R.R. Tolkien. So you see like everything so much connected, and that's what I love about looking at literary history and just seeing the world, like the works in context, because it makes so much more sense to me than just looking at a single work and just trying to appreciate it for like its own without looking at how it has been influenced and how it has influenced other works as well. So let me come to an end now. Number 24 is just from 1869, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, a classic science fiction adventure story by Jules Verne. It just quickly summarized the beginning of the plot. During the year 1866, ships of various nationalities sight a mysterious sea monster, which it is later suggested might be a gigantic narwhal. And the US government assembles an expedition in New York City to find and destroy the monster. So that's just the beginning. I haven't read it yet. I only read Around the World in 80 Days, which I loved and which I can recommend very much. but I thought reading something else of Jules Verne would be a good idea for this series. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. I think Jules Verne is one of the most, what could you say, like visionary or like also imaginative writer, but I think there's so many wonderful science fiction fantasy writers who had so many ideas also like for inventions and about the future, about our lives. So there's so much in it, and I'm really looking forward to just delve into all these stories and just see all those different traditions and ideas and stories, and how the writers working with what they've got there. So I think that's going to be a very lovely, interesting, adventurous journey, a reading journey basically. And in case you're interested, I would appreciate if you followed along. I will list all the books below so you can check whether you are interested in reading some of them yourselves. And as I said, I will try to go through them chronologically, starting with the Epic of Gilgamesh. I'm looking forward to that very, very much. If there's any other stories that you can recommend, especially like from like older times, like either ancient times or medieval times, anything you've read and you found especially inspiring, wonderful, please comment that down below so others can enjoy that too. And just let me know if there's anything else you want to know. I also want to link a video that inspired me heavily for this one. It's by Jess of the Shire, and her YouTube channel is mainly considered with Tolkien, but like also more modern fantasy and science fiction. So if you're interested in that, I can just recommend her videos as well, because she's got beautiful kind of storytelling and aesthetic, and I really enjoy her videos. So thanks to Jess for inspiring me for some of the works that I've been looking at here as well. So yeah, that's everything for today. I hope you enjoyed listening to my video, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel. I would highly appreciate that, so you won't miss any of the upcoming videos of the series. And see you in my next video, hopefully. Bye bye.